Welcome everyone to our very last session of the Spiritual Care Community of Practice, Reinventing Ritual, Narrative Presence, and the Spiritual Nature of the Grief Journey. Before we begin, I will take some time to do a territorial honoring, and I would like to acknowledge that the land from which I am presenting on today, the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and before them, the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Huron, and Wendat. I acknowledge the historical oppression of these lands, cultures, and the original peoples in which we now know as Canada. We are grateful for the opportunity to present in this territory. Briefly, before we begin, this community of practice is brought to you by the Palliative Care ECHO Project. This initiative is supported by a financial contribution from Health Canada and aims to cultivate communities of practice and establish continuous professional development amongst healthcare providers across Canada who care for patients with life-limiting illness and their families. To learn more about this project and the many ECHO programs that we have available free of cost, please check out our website at www.echopalliative.com. Many of you may know LEAP Core as one of Pallium's interprofessional courses that we provide. You can learn more at our website at pallium.ca/course/LEAP Core. This is the overview of the series for this series. This is an overview of the sessions for this series. And as you can see, we are at our very last session, and hopefully we'll be coming back for some more very soon. Some welcome and reminders. Our hope is that over time, this community of practice will help you get to know each other better. And so we please encourage you to introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know where you're joining from and tell us a little bit more about yourself. Feel free to use the chat at any time to ask questions and add comments. We will be monitoring the chat along with our panelists, and we encourage you to draw from your own experiences during our open discussions. We ask that you avoid disclosing any identifiable personal health information, and the session is being recorded and will be emailed to all registrants within the next week, along with a copy of today's slides. Briefly, some disclosures. As you can see on this slide, I, myself, along with the presenters and panelists, have nothing to disclose. And lastly, the Scientific Planning Committee had complete and independent control over the content of this session. For introductions, hi, my name is Aaliyah Memdeen. I am the Program Delivery Officer here at Palliative Canada. And now I will pass it on to our presenters and panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Peter.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much. And I'm certainly pleased to be a part of this today. I am a psychospiritual therapist in a private practice at St. John's, Newfoundland, Labrador. And I have extensive experience, especially in grief and bereavement in spiritual care. And it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Oceana, if you'd like to go next.
Sure. Welcome this morning. My name's Oceana Hall. I live and work in the Wasanic People's Lands here in Victoria, BC, on Vancouver Island. I am an end-of-life palliative care specialist with a specialization in MAID and bereavement. I look forward to having you join us today and sharing what we have to offer, and really invite you to contribute because we all learn from each other.
Sheila.
Hi, I'm Sheila Atkinson. I am a certified spiritual care practitioner with CASC, which is our national organization for spiritual care. And because I work in Ontario, many of us also are registered psychotherapists with CRPO. My role is within a pediatric hospital as a grief support coordinator. Sometimes coordinator sounds like just the umbrella, but I'm also the things under the umbrella, some of that psychospiritual kind of support to families.
Christy.
Hello, I'm Christine Enfield, and I'm coming to you from Treaty 6 territory in Edmonton, Alberta. And I am a spiritual health practitioner on the tertiary palliative care unit at the Grey Nuns Community Hospital in Edmonton. And looking forward to our topic today and learning more about how to use ritual in our care for each other. Welcome.
So with that, I will go over some of the session learning objectives for today. Yes, and upon completing the session, hopefully you will be able to understand the place of ritual and ceremony in palliative care and bereavement, to be able to listen for spiritual themes and provide narrative presence at end of life, and lastly, to explore the spiritual nature of the grief journey. I will now pass it on to Sheila to continue the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Aliyah. I think one thing I was just going to say about, as you see our identities on that one screen, the place where the four of us are connected in common is through the Canadian Association for Spiritual Care, which is our certifying, educating, and sort of continuing practice body. And just sort of for people's awareness, because I know you come from so many professions, but that's what brings us together as people who said yes to this opportunity to create the broader community. So the topic for today, I'm going to go backwards and begin with, so the broad topic of reinventing ritual, narrative presence, and this sort of the spirituality of the grief journey. I'm going to go in reverse. The way the sessions are named and they're titled, and we have subtitles, and then we create them. And as these sessions have evolved, Peter ended up giving us a really thorough and quite beautiful representation of the spiritual nature of the grief journey in session 4, which is the one we did the last time. And so I really will redirect you back to that if you'd like to just listen and steep yourself in some of that reflective, deeper work around spiritual themes and the spirituality at the core of the crisis of a grief journey. I'm going to give us also just a few little tags back to some of the content, just 3 items, which I think will remind us of why is a grief journey inherently a spiritual journey and a spiritual crisis as well. So here are these 3 things. We've talked about this sort of foundational place that we come from. I use this particular language for it, but you've heard us use varieties of language for it. The spirituality in palliative care and bereavement, which is really the overarching umbrella of this series. We are all spiritual beings. We've said that in a variety of different ways, that we understand all of us human beings to be that. And death and loss and grief are spiritual experiences, and often they create a spiritual crisis. And when I speak this kind of language, I say, it's not that we all say, I am losing and I am in grief and oh my gosh, this is a spiritual experience. But people have that experience sometimes, even if they haven't begun to name, oh, that's a dimension of who I am. And so we're speaking that at the very broadest level. People who are faced with loss, often the way that spiritual crisis is expressed is in deep questioning. Wondering, questioning. Sometimes it's screaming, sometimes it's crying, sometimes it's lamenting, sometimes it's falling on the ground. So that's not everything that people do, but just that idea that it can be a core, almost primal experience. And for many, this is a first time that they've gone, wait a minute, life was just going along and I haven't asked those kinds of questions before. How do I do this? And that is very often where either we as interprofessionals who understand enough to reflect back those questions can begin, or where there might be referrals to the expertise of spiritual care. The second thing, again, I think we've brought this sort of at 1, 3, and 5. So here it is one more time, and there's no test. This definition of spirituality that we have referenced, that spirituality is the aspect of us humans that refers to how we seek meaning and how we experience our connectedness. That's really like even summarizing it down farther, seeking, expressing meaning, and how we experience our connectedness. And I think if you listen to the themes in the other two areas that we'll talk about today, you will hear us speak again about connectedness, community, how we interrelate to each other in those things like ritual and like narrative experience and listening. And also the whole thing about meaning and how we're sometimes naming meaning in those things. We're sometimes exploring meaning, we're lifting it up, opening it up, things like that. So just reminders of this internationally created definition. It's from a while ago, but it works. And it seems that we keep coming back to put our finger on it. So the next final piece of just this kind of touching back to things is this idea that we've used the language in two of the sessions, this language of supporting existential reflection and meaning making. We took it into some broad areas of grief and palliative care, and we took it into some of these specialty that Oceana works in around MAID and around the assistance of people in their dying and choosing their time of dying and the outcoming existential reflection and meaning making that comes from that. So that's just reminding us that we're supporting that. Often we're doing it through words, through listening and talking, but you'll also, I hope, hear how when we come to things like creating symbolic acts, small symbolic acts, expressive things that we call ritual or mini ritual, that we're affirming this idea that we don't always have to use words to express this reflection and this meaning making, that sometimes it is in symbol and in action as well. So I will move to the theme of reinventing ritual. There are different terminologies that I have used over the years. I remember doing a presentation on this at one of our professional conferences way back in like 99, 2000, I think it was. And already then I would have spoke readily, and so would my colleagues, of the idea of the evolving away from the typical traditional historical rituals. Many people, I think I was on the West Coast at that time, and I think I particularly would have, I think, shared an opinion with many other people that freedom, oversimplified, overgeneralized, but that kind of freedom and exploration that is part of now all of our culture was most certainly already something where people said, yeah, that's the old thing, but what could I do? How would I connect meaning to myself? But we also have lost ritual when we have lost the traditions. So I wanted just to make a brief reflection here. In many ways, palliative care and bereavement support are very creative areas of practice. And I'll just let you think on that for 3 seconds. This idea that when we're in these worlds, there's a lot of complementary and expressive therapies that we use. There's a lot of ways in which we say, would you like to write that? Would you like to record your legacy for your family? Would you like to express it in some art? Would you? So there's creativity, and there's also a lot of space. And I think when we come to things like, when we listen to people's narrative, when we engage that, when we go into the area of ritual, those are profoundly creative aspects of the work, but I think they reflect the fact that this is a creative area of practice. One of my passions within spiritual care and grief support has been, how do we help people create a healing practice or an act of remembering that takes them beyond just the concrete things or facts or stuff of this experience. So we can say to people, would you like to make some hand molds? Would you like to make some memories? Would you like to do some handprints? Would you like to make a special birthday party because the birthday is going to be too late? And would you like to do? So there's 1,000 things that we can do. But what are the things that help us to help people to touch something that is mystical or that is an experience of a moment of comfort or light, or fill in the blank? You will have your own language. Maybe you also have secular or non-religious, non-spiritual language for what is that thing, that sort of breathtaking moment, or that aha moment, or that I can't put it into words moment. So that's the kind of thing I think about when I think about how we help people to ritual. It's not just so we can do something. It's so that we name or represent something that is beyond us and beyond words. I grabbed a very, very simple definition of ritual. I didn't go researching it. I just saw in a list of definitions, I saw this one and I thought, I'm going there because it is something that it sort of removes all of the, I'm sort of contradicting myself almost. It removes the ethereal or the sounding like it's particular to people who have a very mystical way of being or whatever. But this idea of the sort of nuggets of what is in ritual. Ritual is a sequence of activities that often involves gestures or words or actions or revered objects, or an object that I assign a meaning to. It could be a new object. And sometimes it includes, this is my addition, the second part, sometimes it includes ceremonial elements, I want to call them, elements like music or silence, or a certain location, or a certain set apart place. And there's 1,000 ways. Again, just imagine those experiences you've maybe had in relation to a family or patient. Oh, they didn't go to the house with a symbol on it. They went to a nature place, or they went to an open space, or they went to the favorite part of the beach, or whatever it is that they might have done, or they sat in their bed and we did ritual. But just that idea. So if you just gather those are elements that often become a part of ritual. I have gone and gathered. I've watched a series by Houston Smith, I think with Bill Moyers, I think was the name, many, many years ago. Houston Smith is somebody who is a thinker and a writer and has done a lot of work in the area of ritual and myth and religious experience and religious forms. And so this definition, or sorry, pardon me, this quote about ritual and connection, I find is quite powerful. Groups often use rituals in order to feel closer with others who are in the same group. When rituals are performed together, they can create a sense of community. This ability to create a sense of togetherness may be one of the most important parts of ritual. And in my mind, I see sort of the two arms of ritual being the things that are about this, that have very powerful influence and impact in groups and in togetherness and community. And then the part of ritual that is sometimes very personal and very intimate and very private, or just with a selected close group of people. So people can do ritual for themselves or have somebody do ritual for them as an individual. And I wonder if that is in fact part of the reality of this reinventing, recapturing, reclaiming, restoring of ritual, is that it now comes in many more forms that are very single, that are very at a smaller, more intimate level. I'm just going to stick to some notes here to keep myself on the track. Reinventing ritual is the term we've used. I think when we come to Oceana's part of the presentation at the end, she uses one of the other words, this reinventing, recreating, reclaiming, but the idea of coming back to ritual. Ritual is a natural instinct of humans from early times. These are just some thoughts that I keep having that I've used over the years around talking about this as it keeps evolving. A close one died, people piled stones, or they created monuments to mark the person, or to mark the place, or mark the connection. And then over time, cultures have developed very elaborate rituals within their varied beliefs and customs. And we live in this time now. So this is all evolutionary. It's all incremental. But we live in a time now where there is less adherence to prescribed cultural or religious practices, and therefore there is a loss of ritual as we used to know it. And there's this space, there's this huge opportunity for us to reclaim, reinvent, recreate ritual, make something new, ceremony in new ways that reflect contemporary and often more secular spiritual meanings, is how I speak to that. That we're not trying to make something to fit in an old box necessarily, but we really are looking outwards and looking into a person or a small group or a family and saying, what would say the right thing for you? I was, as I was putting this together, I was thinking just in kind of a sample way, I will say, not a thorough list, about the benefits of ritual. Why would we even say, oh gosh, we got to reclaim, we got to reinvent, we got to come back to some of this? There is a very strong way in which ritual provides a sense of predictability in the face of uncertainty and anxiety. So in my language, that is a quote that comes from a BBC Online article by somebody just gathering some of the popular understandings of this and a little bit of the research, but this idea of order in chaos. So I often will speak in that kind of language to people because I'm a spiritual care person by background, and also because I think it makes sense to people. The world just blew up for you. It's really in chaos. And when we do a little thing where we put some things somewhere and we decide on certain things, we can create a little bit of order around that chaos or in the midst of that chaos. It creates a stronger sense of connection sometimes with a loved one who has died. There's an act we go through and we put their favorite things, or we have somebody say their favorite words or sing their favorite song, and we increase that kind of what's the word, that progressive shift to a continued connection, but in a new way. It creates a bit of a sense of control that's related to the order and chaos. It creates an experience of connectedness and community. That was Houston Smith's quote there. And this idea of facilitating perspective, facilitating sometimes some kind of aspect of release or growth or movement. I sometimes call it shift. It's not like I'm turning away from something. Parents in my context say, I'm not closing, I'm not getting over this, but how am I going to go? So shift and movement in this experience of dying or of grieving. Question that I always am asking myself is, how do I know what's right for them? We explore, we reflect with people, we open creative possibilities, we listen or we see something in their context. We ask them to help us understand their meanings, and I've referred to that in a previous session. So again, I've pulled these questions back from the previous time, but this idea of what holds everything together for you and your family when life was good, when life was okay? Is it the love at the center? Is it family? Somebody in our rounds this morning said their spiritual center is their family. That's the core. Is it shared beliefs or values or nature or laughter, or we believe in humor in our family? I mean, there's really full 360 there of possibilities. Are there, and then this is another, a sentence that I've often tried to teach colleagues, so interprofessional colleagues, not do you need a baptism for your baby, or do you need the priest to come, or do you need whatever, but are there some important words that you need somebody to say when your person dies? Are there words of love, words of gratitude, words of sending, words of committing them into safekeeping, words of sending them on a journey to a next place, or words that just say thank you? And is that something you guys are going to just do together? Do you want me to be a silent witness to what you do? Or do you need somebody to help you so that you're a participant and somebody else expresses that. That's a personalized ritual. I am going to, let me just see here. I had 3 examples, and of course I can only use one and a half of them. Examples of creative ritual. When I'm talking, I am currently in my grief support role. Part of my role is on some of my units to participate in the end-of-life education. Pediatric oncology nurses, about 6 months in, they get the end-of-life education extra day of their training. And so in part of that, we don't just say, here's how to make hand molds and here's how to make handprints and here's how you can support your families when their child is dying, but we're also talking about their own reflective practices so that they can survive this work, so they can want to still be here 2, 3 years from now. So some of what we talk about is this idea of what do I do? We don't talk closure immediately with families, but you do talk that when you're working with a team of people who are going to work in this business, and they're going to keep working, and they're going to keep having doors open, doors close. And so I'll just give you a quick piece here. I reflect with them on ways to process, to make some closure, to create space for their next person. Some people might have a certain habit. They might always send an email, and that is their sending. That's their release. They might have tiny little I just give this as an example to them, and many of them go, oh, I'm going to think about a variation on that. Tiny stones that they put in a bowl, and there's just an initial, and thus it marks that I have been part of the sacred journey or the journey for another family. As I was reflecting this, I thought, people can put them in a bowl that is in their house. They can put it in a bowl that's outside their house, in their garden, or they can take them to the water and send them away. And each of those things, so the point is not all the possibilities, but each of those things has a different meaning. One says, whoa, you are the kids that are woven into my life. And over in my special place that I go to pause or to meditate or whatever, that's a little piece of me as a person and as a professional. If you take them outside, maybe you're defining the boundary. This isn't part of this life, it's that life. And there's many other ways you can go with that, but just to give you a little idea. I will just leave the other examples. I'll just use the second one. They're in our parent grief groups that we do on Zoom. We use a closing reflection. We invite people to bring, whether it's the candle they always light for their child or if it's their cell phone light, and just to have a pause at the end. And I have a variety of things I've gathered over time, but often we're speaking of the light that represents the children we remember, the light that we have held for each other in this circle, the light that we carry with us, any variety of those things, depending on what the content of the group has been. And I have some words that I borrow from a variety of places, but that really are fairly transcendent of tradition, so that they can be helpful to anybody along the way. I'm going to shift to this theme about narrative presence. I would say that engaging narrative presence with our clients, with our families, is also needs to be creative, diverse, and varied. I'm pulling just a few. I feel like we've got a bit of a sort of like a potluck. We've got a few topics for today, and I think the common thread is these are things that we can put in our tool bags, in our backpack, in the side of your brain. You hold all these things in, it's like on the table, in the cupboard, wherever it is you keep those. But the idea of just opening up kind of to a little bit of how we as different practitioners think about these things, but also use some tools in this. I had the chance to be part of a presentation where my colleague and I were talking about mindfulness and compassion in the context of the grief support work we do. And so I've borrowed from myself here just to bring a little bit of this reflection. Narrative is at the heart. It's at the heart of so much of what we do in psychosocial, emotional, spiritual support. It's at the heart, and sometimes it isn't a spoken narrative if we work with people who don't have that ability to give us a verbal narrative. But there are many kinds of narrative, and narrative is in the heart. We're listening to the story. We are often reflecting back the story that we've heard. But if we only reflect it back, if we just say, yeah, I can hear that's really awful, that's really terrible, that's really hard, we can sometimes sort of not cause people, but we allow people to be kind of stuck in the darkness side of things. And I want to share just a few thoughts of some things that I have sort of learned, but then also become aware that I've woven them into some of the ways that I support people's reflection. They are, I would say, related to some of the mindfulness attributes and ways that I've brought some of that. Not that I sat down and said, I think I should bring mindfulness into my work, but I noticed that I began to think about narrative. There's also, the formality of narrative therapy. I don't do therapy per se in my work because I'm in such a mixed role, but I am always conscious of the therapeutically informed nature of what I do. So, sorry, I keep looking for my on-screen arrows, which are different than my usual arrows. Sorry. There we go. Judging and non-judging, that idea of how can I approach what is in front of me without judgment. When I work with grieving parents, I hear them be so hard on themselves. And I mean that partly in terms of the language that you hear. And you may know this in all manner of kinds of support, not just with parents who've lost a child. I should, I shouldn't, I didn't, I can't, I'm not, I will never be able to. And you can hear the intensity of that judging, even without knowing, you're judging your own responses. And so if I'm listening to parents in this, when I hear these themes in somebody's narrative, after a while, not right away, but after a while, I may begin to reflect back to them what I hear. And I may observe that it sounds like a lot of judging, a lot of almost being hard on themselves. And I may invite curiosity about what would it mean to use an alternate narrative, to change the words. So when you say, I will never be happy again, and I have a parent who over the course of several years really has just held to that kind of language. And I have explored this with her, and she said, yeah, I can. So she's somebody who's willing to take a different tool or some different words and put them in her bag and actually work with them. I would say, what would it sound like to say, right now, I can't imagine waking up without crying? And often a parent or a grieving person will say, oh, yeah, I haven't thought of it that way. So there's just that, and I'm talking about tiny, tiny little beginnings and openings. The other thing that really just flows right out of this is this idea of how the kindness to oneself and the focus on the present moment, I think, are things that I find I am weaving in sometimes to those conversations. Attending to those words in the way I showed that example can soften the intensity of self-judgment. It can shift the attention to the present moment. So right now, I can't imagine allows for the possibility of something that could be different at another time. Many of you may already work deeply in these worlds, but this is just a simple sort of, what do you call it, segmented, sort of pieced version of, I think, some of the things that many people do use in deep, ongoing, long-term therapy. Shifting to the present moment and creating that possibility that there could be something different at another time. I am going to just invite you to, if you've got thoughts and wonderings and questions, can you either just begin to drop them in the chat, and you don't need to read the chat if you want to just not worry about that right now, but just jot them down or jot them somewhere so that you hold those questions. And I'm going to turn it over to Oceana now. Oceana works in some varietous different fields than I do at the current time, and has likewise just a passion for how do we help people to these things, these rich and beautiful things of ritual. And so I'm gonna, I think, Oceana, do we both have the slides? I'm gonna flip it to your beginning slide, and thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I have found that our experience of the pandemic has in so many ways affected how we have viewed especially our work here in healthcare now. And so I thought I would just offer a little reclaiming ritual that will allow us to acknowledge and also to release fear, the isolation and the loneliness that was very present in the pandemic. I think that, you know, we tried really hard to allow technology, and it did a pretty good job for the most part to fill that gap. But we lost so much human contact in our lives. Think of the iPads in the birthing rooms and palliative care, at the bedside of end of life, all the gowns and masks and gloves that separated us from skin to skin touch of even our families. We almost had no contact. I work at a hospital that also has long-term care beds, and people used to have to come and stand outside a window and communicate to people that are so hard of hearing that it was almost impossible. So we got little cell phones to try to have that human contact. Everything stopped for so long. There was no socialization in schools and clubs and sports. Our religious services or our service clubs that we belong to, everything stopped. And I think most importantly, we stopped being able to celebrate family and personal milestones, especially not only weddings, but funerals and celebration of life. That was so difficult for people. In my bereavement groups, still people will say, you know, my spouse died during the pandemic, and I wasn't allowed to grieve with any of my friends or any of the family. No one traveled to any celebrations of life. So we definitely know that our mental health has been affected by this post-pandemic fear almost. And I think all ages from small children to the elderly are still experiencing fear, isolation, and loneliness, because you can open up any newspaper and find, you know, oh, go and get your vaccinations. The pandemic is still here. So we've lost a big portion of what I call that cross-cultural human experience of communal ritual. We're still separating ourselves from each other, and rightly so. So I wanted to offer a ritual here that I would encourage each of you to try at home, either by yourself but maybe more importantly, as a family or as a group of friends. Have a ritual party, I say. And the focus would be on releasing that pandemic fear or those residual feelings that are inside of us that we've maybe tried to compartmentalize. So I've developed, and I want to leave time for a lot of questions from our group, but I'll just briefly go through this. The ritual steps that I think are really important are when you find a symbol or find an object or create a situation, a symbolic transference of that fear that we had. I like to use and almost exclusively use things from nature because then they can go back into the environment without harming our planet. And so finding a way to take some symbol and have that object be the carrier of the energy that we want to release. And this particular ritual can be used for anything that you feel you're holding on to that you want to release. And so once you find that object, to be able to sit and pause and quietly imagine yourself transferring the negative energy into that object or into that symbol. It can be something as simple. A lot of people like to use a piece of paper, or I like to use bark from trees that have fallen where I walk in the forest, and I would write on that piece of bark because it's easy to either burn it or bury it then. But what it needs to have is something symbolic to me that's meaningful to the individual that's actually doing the ceremony or the ritual. And once you have that object, then you are going to sit quietly and transfer the energy that needs to be released into this object, an active transference, I call it. And then I like the power of human breath. And so for me, many of my rituals will be having myself actually breathe into that object or onto that object and transferring anything inside of me that needs to be released in a way that is symbolic to me. I love the word ruah, which is a Hebrew word for breath. And there's something so powerful in the human breath. It's what is first taken at the birth of a child, and it's the last thing we release at our death. So then the very last part of the ritual is that physical act of releasing. And when you're ready to release it, when you've put the time and the focus of the intention into that object, you release it. I like to use one of the 4 main elements. I burn it with fire. I throw it into a body of water, moving water like the sea or a river. That's something, as long as it's biodegradable, release it into the air or bury it in the earth, or some combination thereof. This simple little ritual could, for me, brings such incredible release when I feel stuck. I use it after a particular difficult interaction or a difficult death. Everything that all the moral distress that we take in, having a ritual and releasing that is such good health care for each one of us. So I would encourage you to either try this simple ritual or develop one of your own that speaks to the unique needs of what you need to release. So these are some of the questions now. We have almost 15 minutes left, and we'd really like for you to share with us what insights did you learn from today, from what Sheila shared or what I shared? And then what is that wisdom that you're going to hold on to, and how will you weave that into your practice? For me, the beauty of these gatherings where we share with each other is to be able to take something, that little golden nugget, I like to think of it, and have that develop in my practice and become alive and offer it back to our clients and our patients. So I am going to see what kind of questions are here now.
Oceana, while you're doing that, I'd just like to flag a resource that has come to mind as you and Sheila have been speaking, and that is the famous Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh wrote a piece, and all you have to do is Google "When My Mother Died," and it reinforces what you've been saying in terms of he's a very keen meditator, of course, and the meditation practice can be like a ritual, and that's so I think that's really important to consider as an example that people can just go to afterwards and get some sense of what you have been saying. So I'll leave it at that.
So I'd like to invite any questions that you have. You can either put them in the chat or you can unmute yourself and speak.
Peter, your comment about when my mother died just makes me think about one of the things that over time it kind of came out of what I instinctively did when I had a significant loss in my own life some years ago. And I found myself just going, I was far away from the location. And so had to create my own space and whatever I did, but almost just instinctively, I went and walked on the beach because I lived in Vancouver at that time. And I found I had a journal with me. I don't know why, but I didn't journal. I started writing letters. I started writing a letter the first time, and it just was the natural thing. I sat down, opened a page, and I wrote a dear letter. And then I went back the next week and I thought, I think I'm going to do this again. And I kept doing it. And then I noticed, and it's this thing of you're not forcing something with spontaneous ritual, you're listening and then responding. And I went after 2 weeks. And then I realized I went on the date of the death for a few months. And so that's an evolution of a ritual that's personal. And it made me really hold consciousness about that as I worked more in the field of bereavement later on, is to say, I don't know, I had guy sit in my office one day and I said, I don't know, like, do you write at all? He said, yeah, maybe sometimes, but I could try that. And I said, oh, okay. Here's what people do. They sometimes write to the person, and his eyes lit up and he went, I could do that. Okay. And he took away the tool. I don't know how he used it, but that is very, very simple. And it's a different way. And I find now in my current life path with, new losses, that I write intentionally as reflective practice and also as professional reflective practice. But the two are very much merging right now in the particular elements of my current life, that I write to process professional, but I also am writing way differently for personal as well. Somebody said something about the rocks they liked.
There were a couple of comments. This is Christine. So would you like me to share those with everybody? Brenda just was saying that she loved the idea of the rocks for healthcare workers who were involved in a person's death that you mentioned during your talk. And even just putting a little initial or just having a bowl to hold those to mark the significance of those relationships. She liked that idea. And Josephine had a reflection that as she was listening, she realizes that she's actually done things like this in times of grief. And it's helped her to connect with what you were talking about. And she reflected how her sister and cousin planted flowers on her mother's grave and made it a blanket of flowers for her to sleep under. And they used pansies, which are also called heart's ease. So that's another example that's coming to mind as people are listening to this talk. Someone else had asked if there's a way to connect with the presenters, and so Aaliyah has given the Pallium email to get that started. Any other questions or reflections or comments? I know myself, as I'm listening too, it's interesting, like these different pieces of experiences come to you, and times when ritual was really meaningful in that interaction. Something that we have done on my unit that we haven't done very much lately, and I think that's another thing, that with the pandemic, certain things just became kind of unworkable. And we used to do what we called a universal prayer at times with some patients. So I work in an acute care palliative care unit, so it has its own kind of uniqueness. You can't always pull people together at a moment's notice because there's things going on. But sometimes if there was a patient that we'd had for a while, or, you know, there just was kind of more of a closeness of relationship that we had with that family, we might offer to them a universal prayer, which is comes from actually Montreal Palliative Care Unit, and we've adapted it. But essentially, it's just kind of a gratitude prayer or thought. It's not really a prayer, but to also send with love that person. So we say that together if people want to. They have a copy of it. But then there can also be a time to reflect around the circle what that caring for that person meant to those that are gathered. And I was just reminded how powerful that can be for the family to see how the life of that patient has touched others that are even new to that person. So yeah, I just was thinking about that and a number of other things. So it's good to have our memory stirred sometimes, and then it brings some new creativity. Okay.
Mathieu is asking if a copy of that can be included maybe in our pieces of the things that participants receive.
That universal prayer, sure. Yeah. I know Matthew, so I can get that to you, but maybe I'll send it to Aaliyah and she can share it. Good. Aaliyah, is that possible? Okay, yes. Sure. In the follow-up email.
Yes, of course.
I think what we do in our units sometimes, or with our professional colleagues, is important. I know that here at my hospital, before rounds start every week, we have a little ritual of acknowledging reading out the names of all the people that we have cared for in the past week that have died. And it also is an opportunity for staff to be able to share what their reflection is from their experience of working with that individual or that family, because sometimes we hold on to all of this as professionals, and it also helps us build a culture of compassion for each other and to allow ourselves to be spacious enough to each other to see that for some of us, a particular patient really touched us in a way that was beyond our professional persona that we work so hard at holding on to. We are always human beings first, and we need to allow ourselves to have those feelings and building that culture of respect and compassion for each other can make a huge difference in where we work. That's what I've found in experience anyway.
I'd like to invite people to consider the people's reactions and body language, noticing the body language and being sensitive to that. It's often shown in the body, in the facial expressions. I have a friend right now whose daughter is literally dying today, and her face, you can see her face, and not just because I know her that I can notice this in the face. I think there's ways, and sometimes to invite a person to share how they're feeling and look for the shift, look for the response. How is the person carrying their grief or their fear? And just to acknowledge it is so helpful for people. They just feel that, oh, somebody's noticed. That's I think really important to think in terms of dropping. Dr. Balfour-Mont says, drop from the head to the heart, and really claiming that with other people.
I think that we have learned some really valuable things today and takeaways and pearls of wisdom. We'll definitely be attaching all of the resources mentioned in our follow-up email, and it'll, as always, be on our website. If anyone would like to catch up on any previous sessions that they were not able to attend, if this is your first discovery of this really wonderful series, you can find it all on our website, and we really hope that you can join us in the future for our second series of this very successful community of practice. I will be adding a survey into the chat. Please feel free to fill it out and let us know your thoughts and let us know what you'd like to hear more of, because that's one of the things that we want to hear more from you, what you think of these sessions and what it is that you really want to participate in, what that looks like. So please do fill out the survey. It's really valuable to us, and it informs all of our future decisions. As you know, the session has been recorded and it will be shared with participants over email. And as always, it'll be on our website. Thank you so much, everyone, for participating. Thank you to our presenters and our panelists for making this community of practice successful and for sharing all of your expertise. You are all wonderful and brilliant in your own ways. And thank you so much for everyone who joined us today. We hope to see you in the next series. So long. Happy New Year. Happy holidays.